The morning of February 10, 2018, began routinely for Fernanda Maciel with breakfast alongside her family and her mother, Paula. Nothing indicated that this day would become a turning point. However, Paula's maternal heart picked up on subtle changes in her daughter's behavior. Fernanda appeared withdrawn and distantly silent. Her mother had never seen her like this before. The absence of her usual jokes and conversations with her younger brothers and sisters also didn't go unnoticed. When I placed the plate in front of her, my daughter ate in silence, not saying a single word, Paula later recalled. Around 5:28 p.m., Fernanda left the family home, taking only the essentials, her keys and cell phone. Her path led through a familiar intersection to Lima Road, a route she had walked many times before. But this time, the road home would be closed to her forever. The clock ticked away minutes, and Paula felt anxiety building with each moment. Attempts to contact Fernanda proved futile. Every call was immediately redirected to voicemail, creating the impression of a completely turned-off device. This situation was particularly acute given that Fernanda was 7 months pregnant. February 11th became the day official searches began. Paula, accompanied by Luis Peterson, Fernanda's partner and father of her unborn child, filed a missing person report with law enforcement. Police officers didn't delay starting the investigation. However, the absence of direct indicators of criminal activity meant that experts from specialized units weren't yet brought into the case. Law enforcement launched an information campaign. They distributed bulletins among the population, actively used social platforms to spread information, and conducted large-scale questioning of neighborhood residents. The only concrete lead came from surveillance camera footage. The recording showed Fernanda crossing Puntiago Street at 5:29 p.m. What remained a mystery was that none of the other cameras located nearby recorded her further movement. Days of investigation brought no breakthroughs. Investigators found no witnesses, no digital traces of online activity, no financial transactions. Time moved relentlessly, days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The approaching expected due date made Fernanda's disappearance even more painful and incomprehensible. While many people began preparing for the worst news, the missing woman's relatives didn't lose hope. Their determination to uncover the truth and find Fernanda remained unwavering. For a complete understanding of the circumstances of the disappearance, it's necessary to delve into Fernanda's life story. Fernanda Maciel was born on May 19, 1996, in Chile's capital, Santiago. When her parents divorced in 1999, the girl, along with her biological brothers and sisters, ended up under maternal care. Soon the entire family changed their place of residence, moving to Concali. The first years in the new place passed for Fernanda without particular difficulties. The girl demonstrated good adaptability, successfully mastered the school curriculum, stood out for her cheerful disposition, and established friendly contacts with those around her. But with the onset of teenage years, the picture changed dramatically. Academic success declined, and her character became impulsive and unpredictable. Conflicts with peers, biological brothers and sisters, even with her mother became a regular occurrence. Concerned about the situation, Paula decided to seek professional help from the school psychologist. 2007 brought radical changes. Fernanda was sent to a specialized institution for troubled minors. Unfortunately, this step didn't achieve the expected effect. The teenage girl continued to break the rules, appearing at home at late hours, and sometimes not returning at all. Law enforcement regularly found her in the company of young people involved in drug use. The psychological vulnerability of the teenage period led to Fernanda quickly absorbing the destructive behavioral patterns of her new environment, which gradually pulled her into the abyss of addiction. Despite formally living in her mother's house alongside her brothers and sisters, the emotional distance between her and the family constantly increased. The girl spent most of the day sleeping. Leaving home was limited to meetings with her group and satisfying addiction needs. Academic performance continued to worsen, ultimately leading to being held back for a repeat academic year. The tragic event of July 2, 2012, became another blow of fate, the sudden death of her father from a stroke. Fernanda grieved the loss deeply, immortalizing her father's memory with a tattoo bearing his name. However, instead of positive changes, grief only deepened her self-destructive behavior. Family attempts at intervention and providing support invariably ended in sharp conflicts. Alcohol abuse and spending nights away from home became common occurrences. Despite all the difficulties, Fernanda managed to complete her school education and get a job as a hostess at a nighttime entertainment establishment. However, such an environment only intensified her harmful habits. Romantic relationships during this period were characterized by instability and rapid partner changes. Life was rapidly spiraling downward until a fateful meeting with Luis Peterson. This 36-year-old taxi driver, unlike previous boyfriends, showed genuine interest and care. He even managed to win Paula's approval and become a welcome visitor to the family home. Luis's presence in Fernanda's life marked the appearance of the first positive trends. She practically stopped using prohibited substances, and their relationship, despite periodic misunderstandings, appeared sufficiently strong. Eventually, like in any couple relationship, outbursts of jealousy sometimes flared between Fernanda and Luis. One such episode involved the girl damaging his taxi, although similar incidents happened infrequently. Later, Fernanda changed her field of activity, leaving her job at the nighttime establishment for a position as a waitress at a local restaurant. The new job provided greater stability and security. When management learned about her pregnancy and decided to fire her, Fernanda demonstrated a completely different reaction than in previous years. Instead of capitulation, she turned to appropriate regulatory authorities, filed an official complaint, and as a result of persistent struggle, achieved reinstatement to her workplace. At the time of her disappearance, Fernanda's life path represented a story of transformation from chaotic and unstable existence to the formation of a mature and responsible personality. She burned with desire to radically reformat her life and enthusiastically anticipated the birth of her daughter. The first month of searching passed without any significant developments. On March 5, 2018, Fernanda's relatives, driven to extreme despair, resorted to drastic measures. They filed a formal complaint about police work passivity. This step forced management to reconsider approaches and transfer the investigation to the jurisdiction of Chile's criminal police, an elite unit with an excellent reputation in solving serious crimes. The new team of investigators immediately began active actions, carefully analyzing all possible scenarios of Fernanda's disappearance. The first hypothesis was the theory of voluntary departure from home. Law enforcement assumed that Fernanda might have independently decided to run away from home. Motives for such a step could have been a serious fight with Luis or a desire to meet another man. This version gained some spread thanks to media reports about a tourist couple who, while staying in one of the Argentine cities, claimed they noticed a woman with an appearance similar to Fernanda's, who, according to their observations, might have undergone plastic surgery. In desperate searches for her daughter, Paula even made a trip to Argentina. However, after diligent searches, she categorically rejected this possibility. Maternal intuition suggested that Fernanda was incapable of leaving home without taking any personal belongings. Additionally, the girl eagerly anticipated the moment of moving to new housing that Luis was specially building for their future expanded family. The next step was investigating a possible connection between the disappearance and Fernanda's past life. Although she had finally broken with her former way of existence, rumors began circulating in the information space that she had been spotted in the company of Alexander Iudson, a person known for involvement in illegal drug trafficking, and his associate Maria Ares shortly before her disappearance. Witnesses reported that Fernanda had a certain package in her hands. However, both Alexander and Maria were able to document their presence in other places during the critical time, leading to their exclusion from the list of potential suspects. Further consideration was given to the hypothesis of a tragic accident. Some experts suggested the possibility of Fernanda's death as a result of a traffic accident while walking along the mentioned route. However, careful analysis revealed no material traces of an accident situation, and surveillance camera recordings also didn't capture anything that could confirm this version. As a result, this theory was also deemed untenable. Simultaneously, an additional theory emerged: perhaps Fernanda had taken her own life due to depression. However, both relatives and close friends categorically refuted such a suggestion, emphasizing that the woman eagerly anticipated the baby's arrival and was purposefully building a strong and prosperous future. Among other theories, a kidnapping scenario was also considered. However, no one made ransom demands, and any material evidence that would support this version was absent. The final assumption was murder connected to her previous ties in the criminal world. Detectives allowed that she might have been killed over debts. However, as with previous versions, no convincing evidence ever appeared. Chilean investigative authorities scrupulously analyzed all persons from Fernanda's closest circle. A number of potential suspects came under close scrutiny, each of whom could have had motives and conditions for committing the crime. The first candidate for the role of criminal was her current partner, Luis Peterson. Despite their union appearing strong, friends reported that Fernanda had told them about her anxieties regarding his aggressive manifestations. She noted that Luis regularly tried to control her and humiliated her. Peterson himself acknowledged the presence of conflict situations between them, but firmly denied any manifestations of physical violence. "We had difficulties, as happens in any couple," he explained. "But we both eagerly anticipated the birth of our daughter." After detailed verification of Luis's whereabouts, which confirmed that during Fernanda's disappearance he was in another location, law enforcement, despite doubts about the nature of their relationship, found no facts establishing his involvement in the criminal act. As a result, he was excluded from the list of potential criminals. Next, attention was drawn to a taxi driver who had been repeatedly spotted near Fernanda. According to acquaintances' statements, he demonstrated overly active behavior. He demanded her contact number and even offered children's goods. The driver himself denied any harassment and claimed that she independently gave him her information after he delivered her to a medical facility. However, certain text messages recovered from Fernanda's mobile device didn't align with the taxi driver's words. In them, she expressed dissatisfaction with his excessive persistence. Despite this, the driver also had an alibi. And the technical examination conclusions of the vehicle showed no signs of criminal activity. Further suspicions fell on Fernanda's colleagues from the restaurant. While some acknowledged her desire to improve her existence, others recalled regular conflicts between her and the staff over systematic lateness and schedule violations. One of the managers openly admitted that she didn't evoke sympathy among the personnel. However, the employees lacked both obvious motivation and real opportunity to harm her. And eventually all of them were removed from the list of suspected persons. However, another figure remained in Fernanda's circle. Her longtime friend and neighbor Felipe Andres Rojas Lobos. Their acquaintance had lasted over 10 years. And according to unverified data, on the day of her disappearance, Fernanda intended to meet with him at the warehouse where he worked. The surveillance system indeed registered Fernanda heading in the direction of that warehouse at 5:29 p.m. However, no recordings of her entering inside were found. During questioning, Felipe confirmed that he had indeed planned a meeting with Fernanda that day. But supposedly she never showed up. He even sent her a text at 8:05 p.m., "You never came, friend, and I was waiting for you." However, investigators weren't inclined toward trustfulness, and sensing doubts, decided to observe him more closely. And this proved worthwhile. 2 days after Fernanda's disappearance, cameras registered Felipe transporting a 25-kilogram cement bag to the warehouse. A purchase made recently that had no relation to his professional functions. Alarming indicators multiplied. On February 13, the surveillance system captured Felipe investigating the placement of other cameras along La Lima Street. By all signs, he was trying to determine whether they covered the warehouse entrance zone. He was accompanied by his friend Christian, whom Felipe specifically asked to determine which directions the camera lenses were pointing. Later, Christian personally came to the police and provided relevant testimony about this episode. The next day, February 14, Felipe unexpectedly terminated his employment relationship with his employer. This looked extremely suspicious. especially considering the fact that during hiring he had guaranteed management that he intended to work for at least a year. In the early stages of the investigation, law enforcement had already conducted search operations at the warehouse and in Felipe's residential premises. However, no evidence of criminal activity was found then. Despite this, Chile's criminal police continued to suspect him even when the case began to reach a dead end and the flow of new information ceased. The situation changed dramatically after 16 months. In June 2019, a woman approached law enforcement with shocking confessions. She requested anonymity in the case materials and was called Nancy. Nancy reported that Felipe had confessed to her about committing Fernanda's murder. According to her version, he told her that he met with Fernanda at the warehouse on February 10. They supposedly used prohibited substances together and talked. But the conversation quickly took an unpleasant turn when Felipe mentioned his previous partners. At this moment, Fernanda supposedly behaved aggressively, and at a certain point Felipe pushed her. She fell, receiving a blow to the head against furniture items, and began convulsing. Felipe was gripped by panic and didn't know how to act. He tried to help her, but she was no longer responding. In a state of shock, he dug a depression and buried her in the warehouse's back territory. When Nancy first inquired about this matter, he claimed he had made it all up due to a nervous breakdown. Initially she believed him, but over time his behavior began to transform. He continuously looked around and constantly begged the girl not to tell anyone about his confession. And then Nancy realized, probably, he really did it. After her appeal, detectives returned to the warehouse premises. What they discovered confirmed their worst assumptions. But reality turned out to be significantly more horrific than Nancy could have imagined. But more about that a little later. On June 24, 2019, after a 16-month period since Fernanda's disappearance, detectives arrived at the warehouse premises on La Lima Street. Excavation work began in the back territory, an area littered with construction waste and partially overgrown with shrubs. Forensic experts together with law enforcement carefully cleared the territory. At the initial stage, they worked manually, and already at a depth of approximately 35 centimeters, they discovered a solid surface. A concrete structure measuring about 115 by 50 centimeters with a thickness around 5 centimeters. After they managed to remove the slab, they noticed whitish powdery material. It was later determined to be lime. The earthwork continued further. And that's when they discovered a white athletic shoe that was still on a foot. This became the first indisputable proof that they had found human remains. Further excavation showed that the body was carefully wrapped in white tarpaulin. The girl's remains were in a curled position, similar to embryonic. Her limbs were secured with fabric. The remains were preserved in proper condition, and by external characteristics, this was undoubtedly Fernanda. Her dress was found lifted up, intimate areas were exposed, underwear damaged and displaced. Everything indicated that before death she had suffered brutal abuse. Strangely, the body was found in a mummified state. Presumably, it was preserved by the lime and cement with which it was covered. Paula was immediately called to the scene. When she arrived, her heart was breaking with pain. She instantly recognized Fernanda by her earrings and clothing elements. Using fingerprints and tattoos, investigators confirmed the family's worst fears. The body indeed belonged to Fernanda Maciel. During the autopsy, specialists established a fracture of the hyoid bone. Similar fractures often indicate strangulation. In the neck muscle tissues, specifically the sternothyroid and sternohyoid, hematomas were found. These indicators, as well as compression marks on the larynx and trachea, confirmed Fernanda was killed by strangulation either by hands or with the help of a cord. Around the neck area, a tightly tightened strip of dense material was found. This was the object that, as established, was used to strangle her. The intensity of compression was so significant that it led to a fracture of the hyoid bone and other damage recorded during the autopsy. Near the remains, detectives found significant physical evidence, a bundle of pink keys with a heart-shaped pendant that belonged to Fernanda. A black bra and pink underwear. Both items were damaged with obvious signs of struggle, as well as cement packaging. This was exactly the cement that Felipe purchased on February 12, 2018. All these findings indicated a brutal and most likely pre-planned crime, as well as an attempt at its careful concealment. Surveillance system recordings played a key role in reconstructing events. On February 10, 2018, Felipe was recorded on video when he arrived at the warehouse on a bicycle. 12 minutes later, cameras captured Fernanda leaving her home, heading to the warehouse, crossing Puntiago Street. After which she disappeared from view behind dense vegetation. At 5:33 p.m., cameras registered 2 dogs running out of the warehouse. Most likely, Felipe released them after bringing Fernanda inside the premises. Approximately from 5:35 p.m. to 7 p.m., the criminal act likely occurred. At 7:34 p.m., Felipe again appeared in the camera's field of view. He was leaving the warehouse on his bicycle. But instead of a direct route home, he lived literally next to Fernanda's house. He chose an indirect route. Later, investigators interpreted this as a manifestation of guilt. On February 12, cameras captured Felipe purchasing a 25-kilogram cement bag at a construction retail point in Concali. The light blue packaging with a brand logo was later found at the burial site. Later he returned to the same store again, this time for construction mix. Both times he transported the materials on his bicycle. As is known, the very next day, February 13, cameras filmed him investigating street video cameras, as if studying their localization. And on February 14, he suddenly submitted documents for termination of employment. All these actions demonstrated a desperate attempt to avoid criminal responsibility. During the court proceedings, more than 58 witnesses were questioned and 41 experts were involved. The prosecution emphasized the brutality of the criminal act and the defenselessness of the victim, a pregnant woman who trusted Felipe, having known him for more than a decade. The defense attorney tried to achieve a retrial of the case, but the evidence against Felipe was indisputable. The prosecution presented a clear logical picture of the crime, insisting on the most severe punishment, emphasizing the cold-bloodedness of his actions, absence of repentance, and extraordinary cruelty of what was committed. One of the key elements of the prosecution became the delayed and contradictory testimony. Felipe Rojas couldn't provide a clear version of what happened until December 20, 2020. More than 34 months after Fernanda's disappearance. By that time, sufficient evidence had already been gathered against Felipe, discovered remains, established cause of death, and confirmed fact that only he had access to the warehouse. His late confession changed almost nothing in the already established circumstances. It was established that on February 10, Felipe was the only person who had access to the warehouse premises. This was confirmed in the testimony of the warehouse owner and manager. Both were on vacation at that time. Felipe had a set of keys because he performed small errands and cared for the dogs. Additionally, Fernanda's close friend named Nicholas reported that Fernanda personally told him she was going to the warehouse to meet with a friend. This directly indicated not only her motive for going there but also connected Felipe to the crime scene. However, the most horrific information came from the condition of Fernanda's body. Her dress was lifted, intimate areas exposed, and underwear damaged. All this indicated signs of rape. These details suggested that something significantly more terrible had occurred than what Felipe confessed to Nancy. Throughout the entire investigation, Felipe showed neither compassion nor repentance. Investigators characterized him as a cruel, manipulative personality. Moreover, he even allowed himself to joke about Fernanda's death, stating once, "Maybe she's cooking food somewhere now." The prosecution claimed that Felipe is a narcissistic psychopath who perceives his actions strangely, as if they don't concern him. Based on the entire investigation, the prosecution presented a horrific picture of Fernanda's final hours of existence. On February 10, 2018, she left her home, heading to the warehouse to see Felipe. They had known each other for over 10 years, and Fernanda trusted him so much that she went alone, taking with her only keys and a mobile phone. She had no slightest reason to suspect what terrible fate awaited her. Felipe carefully prepared the crime. Several days before the meeting, he dug a depression in the warehouse yard, exactly to the dimensions of Fernanda's body. Such a level of preparation clearly demonstrated, he had advanced intentions to take her life and mask the traces. At approximately 5:33 p.m., Fernanda arrived at the warehouse. At 5:33 p.m., Felipe released the dogs so they wouldn't interfere with what he was about to do. Inside the warehouse, he betrayed her trust in the most despicable way. He attacked her from behind and, using his advantage in height and physical strength, Felipe himself is over 180 centimeters tall, while Fernanda was less than 150, being pregnant and fragile, Fernanda had practically no opportunities to defend herself. Then he committed violence against her. She tried to resist, but Felipe tied her up. He brought her to an unconscious state, leaving her practically breathless. According to the official autopsy conclusion, Fernanda died from suffocation. However, further analysis put forward an even more horrific version. She might have still been alive when she was buried. According to specialists, death occurred from lack of oxygen and because Fernanda was too tightly wrapped in fabric and constrained in an embryonic position, in which she physically couldn't breathe. The intensity of pressure and violence that Felipe applied during the attack made him think she was already dead. But she might have still been alive. He wrapped her body in fabric, buried her in a shallow grave. It was there that she finally suffocated. Her unborn daughter no longer had a chance for survival. Shortly before this horrific tragedy occurred, Fernanda had chosen a name for her daughter. The girl was to be named Josephine. By April 7, 2023, the court sentenced Felipe to the maximum punishment, life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. When pronouncing the verdict, extraordinary cruelty, treachery, and premeditation of the criminal act were taken into account, as well as the need to preserve public trust in the judicial system. I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Until next time, friends.